Hello again and welcome to another Warhammer 40k Imperial Guard Tactics video. Now before we get into today's video, I would like to take a huge thank you to Josh Kozecki for sending in some awesome pictures of his 132nd Praetorian Dragoons, the First Company. Really like the paint scheme you've got going on here, Josh. The red and the black just work so well together. I'm a big fan of red and black colour schemes. I think they're just two colours that just complement each other so well, and it just looks amazing. And that colour that you've got managed to go on the dozer blade as well, those beautiful crisp yellow hazard stripes, you can almost go swimming in them. That's how just nice and crisp that they look. So massive thank you for sending these pictures in. Josh, actually, we were chatting on a live stream recently, and that's just where the motivation for him sending these pictures in has come from. So I was like, hey man, you know, if you've got 2k of Praetorians painted up, send them in. So if you haven't checked out one of the Mordian Glory live streams yet, I highly recommend that you do. It's a lot of fun, and it's a great way to have a bit more of a live interaction between myself and the community. So massive thank you to Josh for taking part in one of the live streams and for sending these pictures in. If you don't want to send them in sort of our live stream or anything like that, please send them to me via mordianglorytv@gmail.com, or you can post them on my Facebook page, and there's links and there's emails down in the description below. Without further ado, let's crack on with today's video. So today guys, I want to do a quick tip tactica on running a combat Imperial Guard army, because it's something that every Guard player at some point in their career decides they want to do. I want to run a combat Guard army, and it is, tell you what, it's a lot of fun, and it's not necessarily the most competitive way of running an army, but it is a lot of fun. It's a big meme, and it just feels right bayonet charging things, right? I mean, we can all agree on that. Sometimes you just need to fix bayonets and just stab the googly-eyed monster in the face. And so what I'm going to go through today, guys, is just a few quick tips and considerations that you're going to want to take into account when you are running or thinking about running your combat army. Now, the first thing to mention is that Guard have a number of dedicated combat units that you're going to want to consider, but you don't necessarily want to overload on these ones. So firstly, you've got Ogrins and you've got Bullgrins. Now, out of the two, Bullgrins have traditionally been a better close combat unit, and Ogrins have kind of been a mixture of a combat unit that has a little bit of shooting. Both units are very tough, both units are pretty durable and have fairly decent combat output. The issue with both of them is they are quite expensive, money-wise and points-wise. For a single squad of 3 Bullgrin, you're going to be looking at today's sort of points, like 105 points. Ogren are a bit cheaper, three of them are 75 points, but you're going to want to run them in big, like 9 Bullgrin blocks. I think 9 is actually the maximum you can take. I don't think you can quite get up to 10, but 9 Bullgrins or 9 Ogrins, and they are really powerful. Now, you're also probably going to want like some support characters in there for those units, and you want to consider things like priests, who have traditionally always been a good supporter of Guard combat armies. Now, priests have changed a lot through various editions. Sometimes they used to give you rerolls, sometimes they give you extra attacks. It doesn't really matter. I'm not going to go into specific buffs that priests give, because this video could, Guard codex could drop, this video could go out of date quite quickly. But what I would say is that priests have generally been quite a good combat unit to support your Guard forces. Quite a good sort of supporting buffing character, one way or another. In the current 8th/9th edition codex that we've got at the moment, another good combat unit to take into account is your Crusaders. Now, Crusaders are not as durable as Bullgrin. They've still got an invulnerable save, they've still got a power sword, but they're significantly cheaper. They're less than half the price of a Bullgrin. They're about a third cheaper than an Ogrin, and so you can get a lot more of them. And 30, for a squad of 10, you're looking at about 160 points, which isn't too bad at all. But bear in mind, if you're trying to foot slog these guys across the table, you're going to be struggling somewhat. So those are kind of some of the dedicated combat units. But the thing I tend to find, and you guys correct me down in the comment section if I'm wrong, but the thing I tend to find is when people are wanting to run combat Guard armies, they're not thinking in terms of Bullgrins or Ogres or Crusaders. They're thinking in terms of bayonets and balls. That's what they're thinking about. So if you're going to be running an infantry-based combat army, there's a couple of things you're going to want to take into account. Firstly, it's really important to pick the right regiment trait, to pick the right regiment for your army. Right now, Katachan is a pretty good one because you get an extra strength across the board, which is fantastic. But there's also the custom regiment trait you can pick, which is kind of nicknamed Slumlords, where you take Slum Fighters and Lord's Approval. And that allows you to get exploding sixes to hit in combat, and it also means that your attacks are AP -1 as long as there's an officer nearby. So they're really that's quite a good combo as well to have as a trait, because the Catachan one, you've got more strength, so you're more likely to wound. Going from strength 3 to strength 4 is really big. The Lord's Approval Slum Fighter one is good for AP, but what you've got to take into account, now this might not be a thing in the future, but right now, as we're recording this video, 31st of May 2022, you've got Armour of Contempt out there at the moment. And Armour of Contempt basically ignores any AP you're going to get from your Slumlords trait. So I think at this point right now of recording this video, Catachans is the way to go. But if you're watching this in the future, and this seems like I'm talking nonsense, just take the general consideration of make sure you're picking a regiment trait that's actually going to help you. So that's a big thing. Second thing you're going to want to take into account is if you're running an infantry, bayonets and balls brigade, then it really comes down to you've got two choices. You've got conscripts and you've got infantry squads. Now, infantry squads can have all sorts of upgrades to make them slightly better in combat. But the two principal ones you're going to want to be thinking about is what weapon you give your sergeant, and you're going to want to take a heavy weapon team. Now, that might sound crazy, but let me come back to that second bit in a minute. When it comes to taking a weapon on your sergeant, there's two that you want to really consider. And there's only two. You might have more options of this in the future, but right now you've got the chainsword and you've got the power sword. Now, if you're going down the Slumlords approach, the chainsword's probably fine, probably good enough. If you're going down the Catachan route, I would go for the power sword. I'd go for the power sword because you don't have any sort of AP in your infantry squads as Catachan, and so there's nothing. I've said this many times over the course of my YouTube career, but having hidden power swords in squads is actually a good idea, or having access to hidden power swords is quite a good idea. I used to be a big fan of running like a cheap commissar, literally like 15 points of the power sword, because sometimes it would just be really helpful to just be able to have a hidden power sword in a unit. And to this day, I still am not totally against giving officers, officers that you're willing to sacrifice, or characters you're willing to sacrifice, or squads you're willing to sacrifice power swords. Now, as per the latest balanced data slate, you can take power swords for free on infantry squads, so it's a bit of a no-brainer. If you're taking Catachan, then power swords with extra strength means you're actually hitting at strength 5, which means that Catachan sergeant with the power sword is now actually going to be getting strength 5 and wounding Marines on 3s, which is pretty big, especially with the rise of like Armour of Contempt and Marines making a bit of a comeback. It's pretty big, and your power sword is still AP 3, so you're still going to be having a good time. Just slight addendum, kind of why I'm favouring Crusaders over Bulgars at the moment, because Bulgars have only got AP 1, which Armour of Contempt wipes out, but Crusaders have got AP 3, which means they still do bad things to power armour. But anyway, back to the infantry squads. The other thing that I mentioned was the heavy weapon team. Now, some people are going to be saying, what the hell are you talking about? Why would you take a heavy weapon team in an infantry squad that's going to be designed for combat? Isn't that a waste of points? Well, it's not a waste of points right now, at the time of recording, because infantry squads can take heavy weapon teams for free. But in the future, let's assume that infantry squads don't get free heavy weapons, or you come across this video where you're playing a different version of the game, because you might want to do that. Infantry heavy weapon squads are still fantastic because of how big the base is. So what you do is that allows you, that big base allows you to get every single model in engagement range. Because the engagement range rules are that essentially you have to be within an inch or within half an inch of a model that's within half an inch or an inch of an enemy model. So basically, if you've got your heavy weapon team and it's in base-to-base contact with the enemy squad, then all of the other guys, it's such a big base, all of the other guys in that squad can use, if they're within half an inch of your heavy weapon team, they get to fight as well. Even if actually, if you can imagine how big a heavy weapon team base is, you've got the heavy weapon team touching at the front and you've got a guy behind it. He's 3 or 4 or 5, he's like, what, 3 inches away from the combat actually, but he still gets to fight because he's within engagement range of the heavy weapon team base. So it's really, really good to take heavy weapon teams in your combat guard squads. Even if you just want to take, let's say in the future you have to pay points for them, just take the cheapest one you can get. You don't need a special weapon, you don't need anything else, just a power sword or power weapon on your sergeant and a heavy weapon team will allow you to get loads of people in engagement range. Now the other unit you've got access to is Conscripts. Now Conscripts struggle to do any kind of damage really. They're good at shooting because they can get so many shots from first rank fire, second rank fire, but they struggle to do any kind of serious damage in combat. But what Conscripts are really, really good at doing is absorbing damage, tying people down, and just road blocking and being a bit of a tar pit in general. Even if you take a block of 30, rarely will you get all 30 in combat because, again, we're talking engagement ranges, and again, we're talking the fact that they're probably going to lose quite a few on the way in. So if you imagine at best you're going to get about 20 conscripts in engagement range, that's how many attacks you should figure on getting. Conscripts can't get access to heavy weapons, or at least they can't right now. So that's something else. You are not going to get everyone in engagement range. That's just kind of a fact. Conscripts are important. They are vital for a combat army. You're going to need them because there's going to be some combat threats that you just need to bog down. And conscripts are really, really good at doing that. In terms of characters, other characters to support you, other units to support your combat army, there's a few of the ones you're going to want to take into account. So firstly, if you're taking Katachan, you're going to want to consider taking Strachan. Right now he gives an extra attack to all Katachan people, which is great. If you have him and a priest, you get him +2 attacks on everyone within 6 inches. Now you can either have a bit of a death ball around Katachan, around the Strachan and around the priest, or you can spread those two characters out, or multiple characters. You can get 3 priests in a combat army if you want to, and make sure that everyone in your army's got extra attacks. It's up to you how you want to do it, but people do tend to like to double stack and get 3 attacks within a 6-inch bubble. That's quite nice. Other things to take into account though is it doesn't necessarily just have to be infantry stuff which is good in combat. There are certain weapons, there are certain vehicles that have no issue with being in combat whatsoever, specifically flamers. Flamer vehicles can flame into combat, and you really want to take these guys into account for 2 reasons. Things like sentinels, things like double flamer chimeras, things like hellhounds, even cheap Lehman Russes with triple flamers on them. Whatever you want to do, but taking some flamer vehicles is really, really good for your combat potential because they're tougher. So it's not quite as easy for an opponent just to sweep away a couple of infantry squads and get themselves out of combat. No, they've got a tank in there as well, which is not an easy, especially Russ is not an easy brick to move out of combat. And also, even though they're not very good in combat, they can flame into combat. So don't think of them as having like 3 attacks hitting on 6s. Think of them as having 3d6 flame auto hitting attacks. That's how you want to think about it. And if you're taking Katachan or you've taken gunnery experts, you can get rerolls on those flamer weapons as well. Rerolls in terms of how many shots you get, which is really, 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 really nice. So, and the other thing that this kind of leads me into my next point is, the other point that you can make with these vehicles is that they can absorb Overwatch. So you might have an enemy squad of intercessors, and you've got a couple of squads that you want to dogpile onto that squad, but you're just not sure that they might have some funky Overwatch strat that could wipe out one of your squads, and then the fight isn't very likely to be in your favour. What if you had like a Chimera nearby? What if you had a Sentinel nearby who can go in and absorb the Overwatch, even if it doesn't like make contact? They can only Overwatch once, right? So you make it into you get into Overwatch, and then you charge the rest of your guys, and suddenly that fight's looking a lot more in your favour, and you've taken no casualties on the way in. Speaking of things like chimeras and transports, don't poo-poo them in terms of not wanting them for your combat army. As we've just said, they're good for absorbing Overwatch. As we've said, they can fight in like sort of pseudo combat if they want to, and they're also good for getting your guys at the field. There's 2 approaches to running a combat army. You can either just go for as many bodies as possible, classic World War I style bayonet charge. Let's just go over the top, tin whistles and trench shovels and everything, and let's just go for it, very Krieg style. which is what most people will naturally lean into because it's fun and that's kind of the theme that you're going for, right? But don't be afraid to think of things like chimeras. Chimeras will get you up the field pretty quickly. Chimeras will get your men into the fight pretty quickly. Chimeras can still flame perfectly well into combat, even on 1 or 2 wounds. They don't care. So don't be afraid of things like transports. Another thing to mention is that what can be quite effective, even if you're not running a pure combat army, but you want to have a fast assault element to your army. A cool little tactic you can do is take 2 chimeras with 2 infantry squads, drive them up, and then the turn after, get the 2 squads out, combine them using the stratagem combined squads, and then charge them in to combat, and you've got 20 guys in combat there. Now, why is that important? This leads me on to the next and sort of final point I want to make around this. And this isn't everything you need to consider for running a combat army. These are just some things that you're going to want to at least keep in the back of your mind. Some general considerations. What you've got to take into account is that the enemy will have the opportunity, more than likely, to interrupt you. And one of the big weaknesses of running a really like infantry-based guard combat army is, and if you're not taking conscripts or anything like this, is that you could dogpile an enemy unit, get to fight with one of your infantry squads, and then they spend 2 CP, they interrupt, and then they wipe out the majority of the squads that haven't fought yet. And suddenly your big attack has actually backfired and you've lost a lot of people in your turn and you haven't actually done a lot of damage to the enemy. That's like a worst case scenario, but it's one that you're probably going to encounter every game. So how do you counter the interrupt? How do you counter the counter? Well, there's 2 ways of doing it. One, you use bigger squads like Bulgrin, like Conscripts. That's one way of getting around it. The other way of doing it is to overwhelm the enemy on multiple fronts, which is, in my opinion, the more fun way of doing it. And also, it's kind of funny when your opponent's like, I want to interrupt, but I don't know where to interrupt. I don't know where to do it. If rather than dogpiling 1 unit at a time, if you can line up multiple simultaneous charges, let's say you can get 3 infantry squads on that squad of intercessors and a squad of Bulgrin fighting, those Blade Guard veteran, and and a squad, and another block of conscripts fighting somewhere else. If you can get like 2 or 3 charges off, and all of them are ones that your opponent really values, and he doesn't want to really let any of them go, it's going to make him have to make a difficult choice, but also means he can only interrupt once. So let's say those 3 infantry squads have charged those intercessors holding the objective. It's like, okay, that's not. He doesn't want to let that go, because if you kill his intercessors, then he's going to lose the objective in his turn. That's not good. But he really doesn't want that. Let's say it's a full squad of Crusaders with like a priest nearby. He really doesn't want that full squad of Crusaders going to town on maybe like his Blade Guard or his like Sanguinary Guard or something like that. He doesn't want those guys going to town there, because they're one of his good combat units, and he knows you've got power weapons, and he knows you've got 3 attacks per guy, and he knows you've got zealots, so you've got full rerolls. He doesn't want to let that one go off either. But then he doesn't want these conscripts just sitting there, obsecking an objective off him. Let's say you've wrapped and trapped a unit or something. He doesn't want that unit of conscripts obsecking him, and he knows that if the conscripts go first, they're going to be obsecking him for ages and taking that objective off him. He doesn't want that to happen. That it means he's got no good choices. Your opponent has to interrupt somewhere, but no matter what he does, he's not having a good time. Either he saves his intercessors and the objective, but then he loses another objective to the conscripts, or he wins the main fight between the Crusaders and the Blade Guard, but then loses 2 objectives and could potentially lose 10 victory points or 8 victory points. So that's what you've got. But that's the big threat of running an infantry army. Because you've got lots of little units, your opponent can interrupt. So make sure you get to attack on multiple flanks at once, or to say multiple units at once. One last thing to mention is that just because you're running a combat army doesn't mean you should totally neglect your shooting. The best way to win a combat fight is to have the enemy softened up first. So but obviously you don't want to go too much into the guns, because then you might struggle to have enough infantry and combat units to win the actual combat fight. There's 2 ways of really approaching this. If you're running like a really infantry base, like infantry squads and conscripts, balls and bayonets brigade, then you're going to want to take weapon upgrades, shooting weapon upgrades on your infantry squads, and you're going to want to march up the get up there quickly, but maybe get a turn or two of just rapid fire point blank damage, and then charge what's left and finish it off. That's what you want to do. Don't be afraid to move, shoot, and then charge. You don't just have to move and advance, move and advance, move and advance. Don't be afraid to spend a turn or two softening the enemy up so then you can charge them with your overwhelming numbers. The other way of looking at it is if you're running, like we've said, things like Leman Russes or Chimeras or Hellhound Sentinels. Leman Russes with Triple Heavy Flame are a really good fire support unit for your combat guard because they've got the main turret as well. A really good support unit is Demolisher Cannon on the turret, Triple Heavy Flamer. Even if you're just running a basic Leman Russ, even if you're not running a tank commander, that will allow you to soften the enemy up, then use the Russ in combat along with all your infantry. So it's a good. That's where I really like Leman Russes as a support unit. But artillery is great as well. Having basilisks and manticores and mortars and stuff like that, they can safely pound the enemy, soften them up. The enemy will struggle to counter battery them, and then you can get into combat. And the great thing about those units are that whilst everyone else is that they're cheaper, so you can get more of them and they don't impact your combat potential, but also whilst everyone else is having a big brawl, there'll be some units that you'll still want to be able to shoot at, and you can do that with the artillery piece. They can just sit there and just shoot away, having a great time. So that's it. There's loads of other bits you're going to want to consider, like what orders you're going to do. For example, you've got the Valhallan one where you can shoot into combat, which is really nice. You've got fixed bayonets, which means that in your turn you can fight in the shooting phase and you can fight in the combat phase. And then of course you've got the Vestroyan one, which allows you to shoot into the units to shoot into combat that they're in, which is really, really good with engagement range, which can be quite nice if you've got a little bit of a tricky opponent and you want to have the way of seeing the Vestroyan stratagem is the Vestroyan order, I should say, is it's like getting additional power weapons in the squad, right? So if you've got a Vestroyan squad with a sergeant with a plasma pistol and a plasma gun and like a heavy bolter or a las cannon, and the sergeant's got a power sword as well, then rather than just having one source of AP in there, you can use I think it's fire and repel order, where you can shoot to combat. Well, now you've got a plasma pistol, which obviously that can shoot in engagement range anyway, but now you've got 2 plasma gun shots and you've got potentially a las cannon shot. That's an addition. That's like having an additional power sword or 2 in the squad. So that if you've got 4 power like shots, that's like having 2 additional power swords in the unit. That's really, really nice. So don't underestimate your shooting capabilities, and be aware of what orders you're going to want to do as well. Anyway, that's all for today. I hope you've enjoyed the video. If you have, please consider giving it a like and a subscribe. And if you've really enjoyed the video, please consider becoming a channel member or Patreon supporter. It is thanks to my channel members and my Patreon supporters that I'm able to produce as much content that I can do, and that this channel is still going. Quite frankly, this channel would have died long ago if I hadn't had the support from my channel members and especially from my Patreon support. So I want to say a massive thank you to all you guys, and I want to do some shout outs to some of the recent channel members and Patreon supporters that have joined. So I want to say a massive thank out to Shooter McGavin for joining the Patreon at the Commissar level. Really generous man, can't say thank you enough. Your support is going to go a long way to keeping the Mordian Glory channel going. And I also want to say a huge thank you to Michael Doc Dragonis for becoming a veteran on the Patreon, and I think deserves a shout out, signing up for a yearly subscription all in one go. That's a massive lot of support for me, and I really, really appreciate it. If you do sign up for a year in one go on Patreon, you do get a little, I think like a 5% discount there. So massive thank you to Michael for that. Really appreciate all the support there. I also want to say a huge thank you to the channel members who have signed up recently. Boggy Creek Monster, L1011 TriStar, Matt Drake 87, The Uber Lizard, Sean Stafford, Clown VRO, Mahoney 86, Jonathan Davies, The Cavalry General, Lyman Abraxas, Setzo1, George N, Captain Caveman, PJ McMurray, August Varney, Jesper Engstrom, Killer Kriesman, and Sludge Disciple. All of you guys you're doing your part. You're doing your part. And if you'd like to know more, consider joining the channel, clicking on the join button on the bottom of this video and signing up and doing your part. It's a little bit Starship Troopers reference. Hopefully you guys will get it. But I just want to say a huge thank you to all of those guys. And I'm going to be doing more and more shout outs and stuff for people that do sign up on the Patreon or the channel membership, because it's the least I can do to say a massive thank you to you guys for going the extra mile and supporting the channel. But we'll call it there. Hope you've enjoyed the video. And of course, as always, guys, I'll see you guys next time.